And now, live from Smoke on the Water in Greenville's West End, here is Straight Up with Sturge with Mark Sturgis.
All righty, welcome back in. Tuesday night, it's 7:27 here on Straight Up with Sturge, and let's go straight to the guest line. Let's bring on Anish Shroff, play-by-play for ESPN. Anish, how we doing tonight up in Charlotte?
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I hope you are as well.
I can't complain.
Well, good. Well, let's get started. You were up close and personal with this Clemson football team Saturday as you and Kelly Stoffer were calling the game for ESPN. What were your impressions after Saturday in Death Valley, and what turned out to be a pretty easy 56-7 win for the Tigers?
You know, Mark, I thought honestly, the takeaway was it was a Clemson team that did what they needed to do. The expectation going in was you're playing a weaker team in Wake Forest. If you're a top 5 team, if you're a team with national championship aspirations, these are the kind of games where you need to stomp on an opponent like Wake Forest, and no disrespect to Wake, but they came in really with no identity on offense. Their defense was playing pretty well, but at home, especially after what we saw the previous week against NC State, I think the expectation was, okay, Clemson, here's your chance to kind of make a statement, confirm what everybody already sort of believes, that you guys are a national championship contender, and go out and beat a weaker opponent and do it with some style points, and I think they did exactly that.
And the thing is the offense hit on all cylinders this past weekend, but what continues to lead this club, Anish, is that defensive line and the pressure that they're getting up front, because as I was reading here in the first segment, this is the first time since 2008 Clemson has held 3 consecutive opponents to 14 points or less on defense.
Yeah, that front seven's pretty good and quite frankly underrated. You remember at the beginning of the season, Dabo Swinney kind of said, I'd be surprised if by the end of the season the front seven wasn't the strength of the team. He didn't just mean the defense. He meant the entire team, and I think a lot of people looked at him and was like, hey, you got Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins, Martavis Bryant. You got some pretty good players on the other side of the football, but, with number 90 and number 3, Shaq Lawson, Vic Beasley, and the freshman Lawson's really impressed. Crawford and Jarrett, I think that defensive line is as good as anybody's in the ACC, and that includes Florida State. They've got a pretty good bunch of veteran linebackers, and, this is sort of where football offense and defense work hand in hand. If that offense can get into a sync, and they got into a rhythm against Wake Forest, but if they can get in sync and continue that rhythm, and they're putting points on people, well, now that secondary, which is probably the question mark on defense, hey, you know what? You're up 14, you're up 17, the other team's got to throw. You can kind of unleash the pass rush and make that other team one-dimensional, and that sort of goes hand in hand, and I think that's the formula for this Clemson team going forward, when they get into some of their bigger games, Florida State in a couple of weeks and South Carolina at the end of the season.
Now, the next biggest game on the schedule, Saturday at Syracuse, Clemson's first trip to the Carrier Dome. Interestingly enough, you're a Syracuse grad. What can the Tigers expect? Because, one thing that in the press conferences today, and Clemson played twice in a dome last year. Granted, it was the Georgia Dome, not the Carrier Dome. It's a little bit different setup there. And sorry about that there, as we had a little retraining on the equipment, Anish. My apologies. But getting back to what I was asking you, what can Clemson expect out of this first trip to Syracuse? Because it's going to be loud and it's going to be muggy there in the Carrier Dome on Saturday.
Yeah, go figure. Dome named after the Carrier Corporation, which makes air conditioning units, is not air conditioned. So
I know
it does get hot in there for Clemson folks making the trip. Watch out for the closing doors. It's all air compression in there, so you can't go through one door without closing the previous one. But it's funny that you say, Clemson's got these concerns of playing in a dome, foreign territory. I think up in Syracuse, they're a little scared of what's going to happen when Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins and those running backs get there on artificial turf. With that speed and the offense they have, I think they're holding their breath a little bit up there. But, listen, Syracuse attendance-wise hasn't really done great in a couple of home games this year. They opened the season on the road, a neutral site game really at MetLife Stadium against Penn State, then on the road against Northwestern, lost those two. The quarterback they started in those games, Drew Allen, Oklahoma transfer, did not play well. He lost his job, and a kid by the name of Terrell Hunt has started the last two games. He's looked pretty good, really good actually, but the opponents were Wagner and Tulane. So,
right.
As much of a mystery as it is for Clemson playing, up north in Syracuse and Central New York, I think Syracuse is a big mystery too. How good is their quarterback, and really how good is this team? Because offensively they did not look very good in their first two games, and they've had a bye week to prepare. And I think a big question up there is who are these guys? So I think we've learned a little bit about Wake, or I should say a little bit about Clemson, but I think Syracuse is a big question mark as to how good this team is. Now historically, they've beat some pretty good teams at the Carrier Dome the last couple of years. Beat Louisville a year ago when the Cardinals were undefeated, and West Virginia a couple of years ago, and that was a 10-win West Virginia team. But neither of those as good as Clemson, which is going to the Dome Saturday.
We're talking with Anish Shroff, play-by-play, and in general, everything over at ESPN and each. But, we've been sold for a couple of years when it comes to ACC football that the league is improving, but I think I'm now cautiously optimistic it's happening before our eyes this year. Are you starting to see some of the same things out of the league as a whole as, they take now 4 undefeated teams past week 4 for the first time ever, and again, 2-2 against the mighty SEC, which unfortunately that's the way we do things in the media right now. We have to compare point A to point B.
Mark, the ACC to me right now is the third best football conference in America. You take the SEC, then the Pac-12. If you want to say the Pac-12 ahead of the SEC right now, we can argue about that. But either way you flip it, those are 1 and 2. And I think the ACC is a clear number 3. It's better and deeper than the Big Ten, certainly better than the Big 12, certainly better than the AAC. What sort of hurts the ACC is that past is still prologue, and you're still kind of fighting the perception of the past where
that's right.
It maybe really hasn't been that strong of a league top to bottom, over the past few years. So when you're Alabama and you beat Colorado State and don't look great doing it, well, you're Alabama, you get the benefit of the doubt. Hey, you know what? They're allowed that. They've won 3 of the last 4 titles, the last 2 titles. But when you're Clemson carrying the flag for the ACC, or Florida State carrying the flag for the ACC, and you have a little hiccup against NC State or Boston College, all of a sudden everybody's starting to question, oh, well, those are the teams to beat in the ACC. Maybe is this conference not as good as, what it appeared to be over the first few weeks. So perception-wise, I think the ACC is going to fight that till the very end, even if it continues to win big games. And I think when you get down to the end of the year, see what happens when Georgia Tech faces Georgia, when Clemson takes on South Carolina, when Florida State beats Florida. I think toward the end of the year, when you've had kind of a balance of a season to sort of judge and evaluate these teams, you can kind of maybe revisit it then. But, the ACC is going to have to fight that perception issue. And, you take a team like Clemson and Florida State. Herein lies the problem. Georgia, if they run the table from here on out, which they easily could. I mean, their toughest game left is Florida and then the SEC championship, should they not lose in the regular season. Well, you're a 1-loss SEC champ. We sort of automatically say you put them in the national championship game. Well, what if Clemson's only losses to Florida State or only losses to South Carolina, and they win the rest of their games and end up winning the ACC? Is a 1-loss ACC champion afforded that same right? I don't think so. So to me,
and interestingly enough,
is going to have to run the table if it wants to play in a BCS championship game.
I mean, you think about that potential there. A 1-loss Clemson team that owns a win over Georgia, which if that was their only loss, does the actual game in the first week of the season outweigh the conference battles between the ACC and the SEC? I think that'd be a very, very fascinating argument to watch take place.
I mean, imagine. And now, let's say if Clemson goes and loses to Syracuse and that's its 1 loss,
right.
And Georgia's 1 loss is to Clemson, there's no argument Georgia's getting in. But, if Clemson's 1 loss is to South Carolina, if they lose to Florida State, it probably means they won't be in the ACC championship game. So let's say that 1 loss is to South Carolina, which Georgia beat, but then Clemson beat Georgia head-to-head. We sort of did a hypothetical on the air Saturday. even if you take a scenario, let's say Clemson is unbeaten, the Pac-12's got an unbeaten champ, and let's say Georgia runs the table and wins the SEC championship game. Georgia's your one-loss SEC champion. So now you have an undefeated Pac-12 team. Let's say that's Oregon or Stanford. If you have Clemson out of the ACC undefeated, one would think 2 undefeated teams, you put them in the national championship. But how much do people give credit to a one-loss SEC team if it's Georgia and the one loss is to an undefeated Clemson team? Will that bump a Pac-12 team out? Will because of the ACC's perception, could that still hurt even an undefeated Clemson team, as crazy as it sounds? That's what the ACC's fighting. I mean, if that's an SEC team or even a Big Ten or Big 12 team, we're not having that conversation. But I think perception-wise, the ACC is still fighting it nationally with media and fans.
All right, Anish, 2 questions before we end this segment tonight. What or whom has impressed you the most out of the ACC out of this first month of the college football season?
Miami. I think Miami on defense has made tremendous strides. There's not one guy that jumps out to you. They've got something like 16 sacks from 13 different guys. Last year they had 12 sacks for the entire season, and that's a very good offense with all 5 guys back on the O-line. Duke Johnson, Stephen Morris is a very good quarterback. But the strides they've made on defense, I think they're now in the driver's seat in that ACC Coastal. Even though they haven't played a conference game, they'll play Georgia Tech this weekend at home, which by no means is a gimme. But, Miami has really impressed me with how far they've come on the defensive side of the ball. I saw them last year, and they just looked bad on defense. But they've come a long way under Mark D'Onofrio, their defensive coordinator. And if you want a player, I got to go famous Jameis Winston, redshirt freshman. Yeah. He's been outstanding, the early part of the season. And then he was kind of a question mark. Everybody knew he had the talent, but how good would he be this quickly? And I think his play has maybe made that October 19th game a bit of a toss-up.
All right, final question for you, and I had a long conversation with our good mutual friend Adrian Branch yesterday. I think he has decided, Anish, that we're maybe the 2 most competent. Maybe I don't know if competent would be the right word, at least on my end, but the 2 of us may be the people that should sit down and write the book called AB-isms, How to Live Your Life by Adrian Branch. So I give you the opportunity as we close out tonight. We had a little bit of this on Saturday. What's your all-time favorite Adrian Branch saying, or AB-ism, as I like to call him here on the show?
That's great. I got to think about that one for a minute. There's a few.
All right, I'm going to give you mine while you think of yours.
Okay.
When we were back doing radio in the day, and I keep this one at me at all times. Rah-rah pregame motivational speeches are for suckers. And let me do that in my best AB voice. Rah-rah pregame motivational speeches are for suckers. So that's basically saying you play.
It's funny because we called a couple of games together where for a while it looked like the underdog was going to knock off the team who was favored to beat. And when that happens, he kind of goes Looney Tunes with the Bugs Bunny Elmer Fudd reference. And as AB would say, it ain't no fun when the rabbit got the gun. So I'm going to have to go with that one. Ain't no fun when the rabbit got the gun.
Well, listen, people can follow you on Twitter at Anish, A-N-I-S-H, ESPN. You're a great follow on Twitter. Who are you covering, or who do you have the call on this week?
I actually have I'll be in Miami. I've got Georgia Tech at Miami. Okay. And, the one thing I will say for your listeners out there who are headed up to Syracuse and making the trip to watch Clemson play at the Carrier Dome, Dinosaur Barbecue. Listen, everybody up there says it is unbelievable barbecue, and I know nobody does barbecue like the Carolinas and the South, but for the Northeast, it's supposed to be tremendous, and it supposedly holds up to even Southern standards. So you might want to tell your listeners, your fans, go check out Dinosaur Barbecue, and then maybe report back and see if it meets the standard.
Well, I actually threw that one out there in the first segment upon your recommendation. And, again, I did my homework on where you went to school in that city last night. And interestingly enough, I did not realize that Syracuse was known as the Salt City.
The Salter, yeah,
we
call it the Salter.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Listen, thank you for your time. I look forward. I'm going to come up there and see UNAB up in North Carolina before too long. It was great to meet you, and thank you for your time tonight. And look forward to having you on again in the future, Anish. If you ever need anything
anytime,
from
Mark.
down here, please don't hesitate to ask. All right. Thank you very much. You have a great night. So that was the Anish Shroff, play-by-play man for ESPN, again on the call for Miami, Georgia Tech, did Clemson, Wake Forest, an absolute great guy. I really, really enjoyed getting I was able to spend about 20 minutes up in their play-by-play booth before kickoff on Saturday with them, and they were absolutely fantastic, and I appreciate him taking the time to join us here on the show tonight. All right, phone lines are open. We'll talk about whatever you want to when we come back here on Straight Up with Sturge on Talk Sports 104.9 FM, the flagship station of Clemson Athletics.